We passed the old mine, headlights cutting through the fog, and that's when I saw it. Tall. Wrong. It stood rooted among the trees like it had always been there, its frame stretched impossibly thin, limbs dangling in angles that mocked the idea of joints. Its head, God, if you can call it a head, was a rusted siren. Twin cones angled down as if listening to something deep in the soil. It didn't breathe. Didn't sway. Didn't twitch. It just watched. Jimmy gasped in the back seat, the sound of a boy whose disbelief finally found shape. Bailey pressed into him, ears flat, her entire body trembling. She didn't bark. That silence scared me worse than any howl. I didn't break. Didn't blink. Didn't dare. Because when the thing you've dismissed as a campfire story steps into your headlights, you don't stop to measure its shadow. You keep driving. That was last night. And this is the story that led to it. I don't know who will read this. Maybe nobody. Maybe some clerk in a county office will file it under abandoned reports and forget about it. Or maybe it'll end up in a box in the ranger station attic, where the mice chew through anything that smells faintly of oil or sweat. It doesn't matter. No, that's a lie. It does matter. That's why I'm still writing. My name is Samson. Most folks called me Ranger Samson, like the uniform mattered more than the man wearing it. 16 years I worked these woods, longer than I thought I would, longer than most of the kids who came in with clipboards and ambition. They burned out, drifted off, found jobs with air conditioning. But me? I stayed. I belonged here. At least I thought I did. Bailey's curled under the table now, her fur rising and falling in the glow of this dying lantern. She's the best part of me, an Australian shepherd I picked up from a shelter 12 years ago, when I still believed the woods would keep their promises. She's saved more lives than I can count. Some folks still stop me in town to call her a hero. She always hated the medals. Tried to chew one off the day they pinned it to her collar. If I'm writing this, it's because something has shifted in these woods, something that won't let me rest. And if I don't put it down, it'll keep chewing at me until there's nothing left. 16 years. That's how long I've been stationed at Northern Ridge. Long enough to know which cabins flood first when the creek jumps its bank. Long enough to recognize tourists by their shoes before they open their mouths. Long enough that I could walk the main loop blindfolded and still tell you when we were coming up on the bent pine by the 2nd-mile marker. I always thought of the woods as an equal partner. You respect it, bury your fires, pack out your trash, give the black bears the right of way, and it respects you back. Quiet mornings on the dock. Loons calling across the lake. A peace you can't buy anywhere else. But that's the trick, isn't it? Quiet only feels safe when you think you've earned it. These days, the quiet feels wrong. Sometimes, when I sit on the porch at dusk, I swear the trees are holding their breath. And in that silence, I hear something else, not wind, not owls, not even coyotes, just the pressure of being watched. I used to laugh at stories like that. Told campers they'd had too much beer or not enough sleep. Now I keep those laughs to myself. I keep wanting to start at the end, with the drive past the old mine and the thing that stood there, rooted to the ground like it had grown with the trees. But I can't. If I start there, you'll think I'm a liar. Or a fool. Or both. So I'll start here, where the story is still safe. Where Bailey still stretched out on the porch in the mornings, ears flicking at the sound of chipmunks in the brush. Where the worst I had to worry about was graffiti on the trail signs and beer cans left behind by college kids who thought "leave no trace" was optional. The beginning matters. Because if I don't tell you how ordinary it all was, you won't believe what came after. I'll be honest, I'm not sure I believe it myself. Some days it feels like a dream I can't shake. Other days I wonder if I ever left those woods at all. But I did. And this this is the story of why I'll never go back. Most mornings start the same. The kettle rattles on the propane stove, spitting steam through a lid bent from years of being dropped. Bailey sits by the door like a sentry, ears forward, tail making small thumps against the floorboards. She knows the order: boots, coffee, clipboard, harness. The harness was new last year, green nylon with her name stitched into the side. A gift from the town after she pulled that boy from the river. She looked proud the first time I clipped it, but after that it was just part of the ritual. We step onto the porch just as the fog lifts from the tree line. The air is heavy with the smell of wet pine needles and ash, remnants of illegal fire pits we've scattered and stamped out. Patrol starts with the main loop. Fallen branches to clear. Trash to collect. Signs to straighten where someone's carved initials or drawn something obscene. It's grunt work, but it matters. The trails are promises, and people forget that promises can break if you don't tend to them. Bailey trots ahead, circles back, nose to the ground, tail high. She pauses at old fire pits, nose twitching like she's reading the story left in the ashes. If only dogs could talk, I think sometimes. But maybe it's better they can't. By mid-morning we reach the lake. Bailey chases frogs along the shallows while I sit on the dock with a thermos. The world feels quiet then. Too quiet, sometimes. People think being a ranger is babysitting trees. They're not wrong, but it's also more than that. Some days it's fixing a fence post some hiker drove their truck into. Other days it's fishing beer cans out of the creek before they float down to the reservoir. Most days it's paperwork, incident reports that nobody but me will ever read. And then there are the rescues. Hikers who think trail markers are suggestions. Families who underestimate how long 4 miles feels when it's uphill. City kids who swear they're survivalists until the raccoons get into their food. You haul them out. Patch them up. File the report. Do it all again the next day. It's tiring. But it's home. The new rangers used to joke that I came with the trees, that when they cleared the forest my silhouette would still be leaning on a shovel. Maybe they weren't wrong. Still, I can't complain. I always thought if I kept at it, if I kept the trails clear, kept people safe, kept the rules alive, the woods would keep their end of the bargain. Back then, I believed that was enough. We weren't always so few. There used to be 6 of us, Jake, Amanda, Torres, Pete, Ellie, and me. Jake was the joker, the kind of guy who whistled through rescues just to prove he wasn't scared. Amanda carried notebooks filled with sketches and pressed leaves, as if the woods were her diary. Torres could tie any knot blindfolded, proud of his scout days. Ellie was steady, patient, with a laugh that could break the worst silence. Pete, the woodworker, carved our name into cedar, the Green Watch. He hung the plaque above the radio desk like we were some kind of squad. Corny, maybe. But we wore it like armor. Most of them didn't last. Budget cuts. Families. A hunger for somewhere closer to civilization. One by one, they left. I stayed. Someone had to. When Amanda left last spring, she didn't say why. Just patted Bailey's head, smiled a little too wide, and told me I should try something new. I told her I had everything I needed right here. She didn't argue. That plaque still hangs, though the wood is cracked and the green paint has faded to gray. Sometimes when the radio cuts with static, I look at it and remember the way we used to crowd around, wet boots steaming, laughing about tourists while the logs popped in the stove. The Green Watch. It sounded brave then. Now it sounds like a ghost story. Tourist season always begins with the sound of minivans grinding up the gravel road. Families tumble out in shorts and sunglasses, kids dragging stuffed animals and bags of marshmallows. By sundown, the air fills with the smell of charcoal, bug spray, and laughter. Bailey makes her rounds like a mayor. Cabin 6 always keeps jerky ready for her. The Thompsons at the west entrance save half their scrambled eggs for her every morning. School groups mob her like she's the star attraction, tugging at her fur, begging her to roll over. She plays coy until she decides it's worth it, then flips, belly up, tail sweeping like a broom. The kids cheer. Snacks disappear. She's smarter than most politicians. I watch from the porch sometimes, half smiling, half aching. This park isn't Disney World. It isn't supposed to be entertainment. But try telling that to parents who think nature is just a backdrop for family photos. Still, seeing Bailey bring joy makes me soften. She's not just a dog. She's crew. She keeps the air lighter when the reports start piling up. She keeps me sane when the nights are too quiet. Everyone loves her. They forget my name, but they remember hers. Maybe that's the way it should be. It was July when the first real report came in. A boy, maybe 14, thin as a branch, with a mop of hair and a cracked iPhone he clutched like it was proof of something. His parents trailed him into Station 2, embarrassed, trying to laugh it off. He didn't laugh. He told me he'd wandered past the boundary signs while his folks were grilling hot dogs. Just wanted to take some photos for a school project on erosion. When I asked, he said his name was Jimmy. He handed me the phone. 2 grainy pictures. The first? Trees, blurred by movement. The second? Same patch of woods, zoomed too far, pixels smeared. But in the center, between 2 trunks at least 12 feet high, stood something. Tall. Too tall. Thin, stretched wrong, like skin draped over scaffolding. And its head, it wasn't a head at all. It was a rusted shape, wide and flared, like an old air raid siren bolted to a neck. The photo made my stomach dip. I forced a laugh. Could be anything, I told them. Old equipment, trick of the light. Low-res cameras do that sometimes. His parents nodded, relieved. Jimmy didn't. He just stared at me like he knew I didn't believe what I was saying. After they left, I wrote the incident in the logbook, careful and vague, teen claims sighting near mine boundary. Grainy photos. Likely misinterpretation. But the image stuck in my head. That night, Bailey and I walked the northern ridge as usual. The fog was thick, clinging to my clothes, making the flashlight beam into a wall. Every creak of branches set my nerves jangling. I kept picturing that photo, the long frame, the unnatural head. I told myself it was nothing, the way I always told tourists their imaginations had gotten ahead of them. But I couldn't shake the thought. Bailey trotted ahead, nose to the ground. She paused once, ears perked, staring into the dark. I snapped my fingers, called her back. She came without fuss, but her eyes stayed locked on the trees longer than I liked. I didn't report that. Some things you keep to yourself. The next few days felt heavier. Like the woods themselves had changed density. Mornings were the same, coffee, patrols, tourists, Bailey charming kids. But the silence in the off hours was different. I'd sit on the dock, thermos in hand, and instead of hearing frogs and insects, I'd hear nothing. Just the hum of blood in my ears. Bailey sat beside me, ears pricked, muscles taut, watching the tree line as if waiting for something to step out. I told myself it was in my head. Long summers make rangers paranoid. Too many late nights, too many stories traded over radios. Still, every time I closed my eyes, I saw that stretched figure in the boy's photo. And worse, I started to wonder if I'd seen it before. Not with my eyes. But in the corner of my memory. Like the woods had been whispering it all along, and I'd finally started listening. They came in at noon, sunburned and sheepish, the way people look when the woods have reminded them their bodies have limits. A tall kid with a bandana darkened by sweat did most of the talking, and the girl with him, blister taped like a postage stamp to her heel, stood with her arms folded like she was holding herself together. "We took fire watch," he said, "the steep one. We made the ridge and were catching our breath. I looked out over the bowl, you know the place where the pine's thin?" I nodded. "Everyone thinks they're the first to discover that viewpoint. We see this thing," he said, "out in the open where the grass is high. At first I think moose, but it's," he hesitated, searching for a word he thought I'd accept. "It's wrong in the joints," he finished. "Wrong how?" I asked. "It turned without turning," the girl said, squeezing the tape on her blister like it could answer for her. "Like the top moved but the bottom didn't. Like when you twist a bottle cap and the threads catch late." I wrote while they talked. Where, when, how the light fell. I asked if they'd taken photos. "Phone died," the guy said, and smiled at his own stupidity. The girl didn't smile. "Heat can play tricks. Dehydration too," I told them. "You're at elevation, your eyes are searching for contrast. You'll make one if you need to." "I saw it," she said, quiet and stubborn. "It was tall. It was pale. And it wasn't a person." Bailey, lying by the table with her chin on her paws, watched them without moving. When the girl looked down at her, Bailey thumped her tail once as if to say "I believe you," and then went still again, ears tilted toward the window. Outside, the wind had dropped. The flag on the porch hung with the color drained out of it. I gave them water, a map, the lecture about staying on marked trails, the number to call if they heard anything that sounded like a child. The guy nodded too quickly. The girl tucked the map in her back pocket like it was a talisman. After they left, I let the report sit open on the desk. The ink dried in a hard line. When I finally closed the folder, it felt like closing a lid. One of the younger rangers, contract, summer only, the kind you can tell will vanish when the leaves do, took a photo of the old air raid siren by the maintenance road. Tripod rusted, twin horns frozen at a skyward angle, its base half swallowed by grass. He posted it with the caption, "We heard something weird today," and a ghost emoji. Another kid posted a selfie at the NO entry sign near the east boundary, chin tilted, hashtag Sirenhead Park. The kind of joke that buys you likes from people who were never coming here anyway. By the end of the week, the forum threads were doing what threads do, multiplying in the dark. Someone had drawn a crude map with circles where sightings, probably, happened. Someone else posted a photo of a shadow between two trees and wrote, "Zoom X8, see the horn?" I leaned over the interns at the station computer and told them to knock it off, then went back to my desk and scrolled anyway. If you don't tell your own story, the internet will invent one for you. The county loves attention until it doesn't. For a minute there, we had record numbers, families squeezing into cabins like vacation had a sell-by date. The kiosk cash box got heavy. The concession stand sold out of bug spray. Bailey worked the loop like an incumbent, collecting votes in jerky and crusts of toast. The radios were busy with the usual, lost flip-flops, a kid allergic to bees, two adults arguing about who misread the trail mileage. But the joke had put teeth in the dark. You could feel it. A new volunteer named Ralph showed up, quiet college kid, careful with his clipboard, the type who writes neat while standing up. He asked about the mining trails on the east side as if the map might read itself differently if he stared hard enough. "They're closed," I told him, and he wrote "closed" on his copy like it needed emphasis. Later, I saw he'd underlined it twice. At dusk, when the heat sank into the ground and the frogs tuned up, I'd sit on the porch and listen. You'd think with all the people here the woods would be louder, laughter skipping over water, music low from a distant cabin, but it wasn't like that. Noise happened near the people. Beyond them, at the tree line, there was a quiet that felt like the absence after a stove is turned off, not silence, but the memory of a hum. "Maybe we should lean into it," one of the kids said over lunch, scrolling the comments. "People come for the story. Stories are what get people lost," I said. And lost is what gets them hurt. He put his phone face down after that. Only for a while. She came in at 2 a.m., hair tangled, eyes wild, holding the torn edge of her tent in both hands like she'd brought me the evidence I needed to absolve her of fear. "Something sliced it," she said. "Not clawed. Not ripped. Sliced." She lifted the fabric to show me the cut, a clean line, high and straight, like a seamstress had drawn it with chalk first. "Bears don't cut straight lines," she said. Before I could offer a ranger's favorite, it was probably an animal. "And raccoons don't cut chest high." She wasn't wrong. I took a flashlight and walked her back to the site, Bailey padding beside us, tail down. The campsite looked normal if you ignored the way the trees were leaning, not actually leaning, just attentive. The fire ring held a neat moonscape of gray. 2 camp chairs faced nothing in particular. "Show me," I said, and she took me around to the far side of the tent. The slice began a little above my sternum and ran 4 feet, clean as boredom. I put my palm against the fabric and felt the cool where the air came through. I took out a tape measure because that's what you do when your brain asks you to believe something it doesn't like. "Could be a person," she said, fear softening into anger now that she had company. "A creep." I didn't hear footsteps, though. I would have heard footsteps. "Sometimes you sleep deeper than you think," I said, and hated myself for offering a sentence I wouldn't take at face value if I were the one holding the fabric. Bailey sniffed the edge of the cut and backed up immediately, eyes sliding to the dark between the pines. We swept the perimeter with our lights. I looked for prints, any sign of approach. The dirt told me only that someone had set a tent here and that earlier, hemlock cones had fallen like tiny bells. No drag marks, no scuffs. Only the impression that the cut had begun in the air, not from a body attached to a hand. Back at the station I filled out the incident form in meticulous handwriting, as though neatness could impose order on it. Possible human interference. No tracks found. Advised camper to relocate to overflow near station. She nodded, grateful for the proximity to light, to walls, to my voice. When she left, Bailey put her head on my knee, the way she does when she wants me to quit pretending I'm fine. I scratched between her ears. "Tell me I'm being dramatic," I whispered. Bailey sighed in the way only a dog who knows you is capable of, and the lantern hissed like a snake that was too tired to bite. The first voice we logged came from a retired chemistry teacher and his wife. He tapped on the station door with the politeness of a man asking to borrow a cup of sugar and then apologized for the hour before I could invite him in. "I heard a baby," he said, and blushed. "I know that sounds ridiculous. You get old and your ears invent things. But I heard it, the same cry twice, like a recording. Out by the boardwalk past the marsh. People say baby when they mean help distilled to a sound." I walked him out to the boardwalk in the early morning cool. Mist clung low, grazing the planks like sleeping cats. Bailey's nails clicked in a rhythm we've learned to trust, curious, calm, curious, then flat. She stopped halfway and stared into a tangle of buttonbush and sweet gale, not wagging, not whining, just listening. "What did you do when you heard it?" I asked. "I told my wife to stay put, and I went in," he said, embarrassed. "It was stupid." "It was decent," I said. "Decency is what gets most people hurt." He showed me the scratches on his calves where the thorns had filigreed him. We stood and listened. Only frogs, the distant knock of a woodpecker, the static of midges. Then, faint, a noise like a kettle thinking about becoming a whistle, far out where the reeds make their own weather. It lasted a second, then repeated exactly the same way, same pitch, same rise. My body tightened before my mind settled on the word loop. I put a hand on Bailey's back. The fur there vibrated under my palm as if sound were traveling through the ground, up her legs, into the muscle. She took a step back, then another, and I didn't stop her. We logged 2 more that week. A woman followed her dead husband's voice into a tangle of blackberry until the thorns held her and bled her, and when we found her she cried because she was angry at the woods for imitating him so well. A teenager heard his name called from a direction opposite his group and took 3 steps off the trail before his friend grabbed his pack and swore at him hard enough to anchor him in place. He kept saying, "It sounded like my mom." He said it like a confession. I added a new line to the nightly briefing: "If you hear a familiar voice coming from the tree line, do not follow." I said it in the same tone I use for bears and lightning. It felt absurd until it didn't. If you've heard your name called from the dark in a voice you love, even once, if you've had that moment where your bones light up with recognition before your skin goes cold, drop it in the comments. I'm not collecting stories for fun. I'm making a list of how the woods learn us. The map started as a courtesy, a way to show the seasonal crew where to point the lost and where to expect bog. It became something else with every pushpin. I used red for sightings, blue for sounds, green for other, the cuts, the found surfaces, the animals where animals shouldn't be. Ralph, careful as a surgeon, wrote dates on tiny labels and tucked them beside the heads like stitches. By the end of the second week the east side of the park looked like someone had sketched a clock. The mines sat in the middle like a pupil, the pins ringed them in a near-perfect circle. It's random, I told myself out loud, because saying a thing aloud makes it braver. It's just where people go when they ignore the signs. Ralph watched me measure distances with a length of string the way we used to plan backburns. "It looks like a radius," he said, voice careful, as if opinions might spook me. "Like there's a spot in the center where something is loudest." "Ducting," I said automatically, falling back on weather terms the way a superstitious man falls back on prayers. Inversions can make noise travel weird. "I meant, not the air," he said, and then pretended he hadn't. The radio on the desk popped with static. Not the friendly snow, but the soft press of breath again, and then a syllable, "S." So close to Sam I felt the table through my palms. I clicked it off, then back on, then off again, as if star-feeding the thing would teach it manners. At dusk I stood in front of the map and forced myself to be a ranger instead of a man with a dog and a set of nerves. I drew the circle with a pencil. I wrote restricted, expand at the margin and took fresh no entry signs out to the posts the next morning. People would ignore them, because people always ignore the most important signs. But a sign is a promise, like a trail. Someone has to keep making them. Bailey sat by the door with her leash in her mouth. Not a trick for treats. A request. "Don't go into that circle without me." I clipped the harness and told her she was stuck with me. She wagged once, politely. On the path, she kept glancing up at the canopy instead of the ground, like she expected something tall to bend. That night I dreamed voices spoke through metal, the way wind makes a bottle sing. I woke with the taste of rust on my tongue and the memory of a horn angled down at me like an ear. The kettle on the stove rattled to a boil. I turned it off and didn't make coffee. The first missing pet didn't even make it into the logbook. A woman stopped me on the trail, frantic, leash dangling from her hand like a severed vein. She said her cat had been tied to the camper step while she went inside to grab matches. She came out a minute later and the leash was still there. No cat. I told myself cats are escape artists. They slip collars, chew ropes. They vanish into trees and return 3 days later with burrs in their tails and smugness in their eyes. But then came the beagle. A regular wanderer, well known by the rangers, always looped back to his campsite after an hour of sniffing. One evening, he didn't. The third was worse. 2 dogs, opposite sides of the park, both vanished the same night. One leash was still tied to a tree, chewed through clean, as though something had severed it with precision. Not frayed, not ragged. A perfect parting. I kept Bailey leashed after that. She didn't understand. She'd always roamed ahead, circling back to me like a satellite returning to orbit. Now she trotted at my side, rope taut between us, throwing me looks as if to say, what did I do wrong? You didn't, I told her more than once. I just don't trust the woods anymore. The truth is, I didn't trust what the woods were letting in. Families get lost all the time. It's part of the job. Someone wanders off the trail, someone else chases after them, the group splits, panic sets in. But they always come back noisy, angry, relieved, embarrassed. This family didn't come back noisy. They were found sitting beneath a maple a mile from where they should have been. 4 of them, mother, father, 2 kids. They weren't injured. They weren't panicking. They were just sitting. 2 of them couldn't explain how they'd gotten there. The boy kept asking for his brother, though the brother was sitting right beside him. The girl stared at her hands, mumbling that she felt unplugged. I crouched in front of the father and asked how long they'd been there. He blinked, slow, like someone waking from anesthesia. We were on the trail, he said. Then we weren't. That's all he could give me. We guided them back in silence. Bailey stayed close, watching them like they were strangers who'd borrowed human faces. When we reached the cabin, the parents thanked us mechanically, as if they'd practiced the words but not the feeling behind them. That night, I wrote the report twice. The first time I used words like disoriented and heat fatigue. The second time I crossed them out and wrote nothing. Some stories don't fit into government forms. The day Bailey saved the boy is the one that made the papers. You might have seen the headline, "Hero Dog Saves Child from Waterfall Fall." They made it sound like a Hallmark movie. It wasn't. We were leading a school group along the ridge where the trees thin and you can see the waterfall from above. I was answering a question about lichens when Bailey lunged forward, barking. Half the group screamed. The boy had stepped over the edge. Not stumbled. Not slipped. Stepped. Like he didn't even see it. By the time I turned, Bailey was already over the lip, teeth clamped on the collar of his jacket. She pulled with a desperation I'd never seen, paws scrambling on the rocks, the boy dangling like a broken puppet. I lunged too, grabbing his arm, and together we hauled him back onto the trail. He collapsed, coughing, shaking, then sobbing into Bailey's fur. When I asked what happened, he said, "I heard my sister crying for me." His sister was back at the cabin, safe, 2 miles away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Bailey lay with her head on my chest, her breathing steady against the panic in my ribs. I realized then that I trusted her senses more than my own. She hadn't hesitated. She'd known. They gave her a medal. The mayor himself pinned it to her harness in front of the local paper. "Hero Dog of Northern Ridge," the headline read. She hated it. Tried to chew the ribbon off before we'd even left the ceremony. I let her. What I couldn't chew off was the attention. Suddenly the park wasn't just Sirenhead memes on the internet, it was a real place where a real dog had saved a real boy. Tourists poured in. Parents brought their kids to meet Bailey, as though she were part of the attraction. Some asked for photos. She tolerated it with weary grace. But every time someone called her a hero, I thought about how the boy had looked when he told me he heard his sister's voice. About how deliberate his step off that cliff had been. About how none of this felt like heroism to me, only survival, for now. I started to worry that the attention itself was bait. The more people came, the more the woods had to work with. And the woods were listening. I could feel it. They snuck in after dark, like they always do. 3 of them, flashlights bouncing, laughter forced. They wanted to catch a glimpse of the monster, record proof, go viral. We found them crouched against the crumbling wall of the old mine shaft. Their lights lay scattered on the ground, beams tilted uselessly into the brush. The kids themselves sat pressed together, eyes wide, mouths open, but no sound coming out. Not crying. Not screaming. Not speaking. Just silent, as if something had pressed pause on them. When we guided them back, they didn't answer questions. Not about what they saw, not about how they found themselves there. They didn't need to. Their faces told me enough. Bailey kept pulling against the leash, growling low at the darkness beyond the shaft, hackles raised like I'd never seen before. I didn't let her go. I don't know what would have happened if I had. That night, I marked 3 more pins on the map. The circle around the mines tightened. And for the first time in 16 years, I wished the park wasn't mine to protect. They didn't shut the park because of monsters. At least, not officially. The memo said budget cuts. Said seasonal reallocation. Said attendance had dropped and resources had to be redistributed. All neat language typed on letterhead that made it sound like a chess move. I knew better. So did the rest of the crew. Most left within days, grateful for the excuse. Amanda had already gone, but Torres, Jake, and Ellie packed up what was left of their ranger lives and drove out before the ink dried on the closure order. No goodbyes, no handshakes. Just quick exits, like they were afraid if they lingered the woods would change its mind and keep them. I stayed. Not because I thought I could fix anything, but because it felt wrong to leave without saying goodbye. 16 years I gave to these trails. 16 years of mornings on the dock, late nights at the radio, coffee that tasted like rust and ash. You don't just walk away from that. I asked for 2 more weeks to finish cleanup. Clear the stations. Pull the signage. Lock the cabins. Nobody argued. I think they were happy to let me have the burden. I tried leaving Bailey with my sister. Drove her down, handed her leash over, scratched her ears, told her she'd be safe there. By nightfall she'd escaped and found her way back, paws muddy, eyes accusing. I tried again. Same result. By the 3rd time I gave up. She wasn't going to let me face this alone. The park was quiet then. Not the normal quiet, but a kind of emptiness that felt staged, like everything had been cleared away for a performance I didn't want to attend. Even the air felt wrong, lighter somehow, like the forest had exhaled. I barricaded the cabin doors for the first time in years. The glow came on my second to last night. A flicker of orange at the horizon, low and steady, too sharp to be the sun. Fire. I drove toward it, gravel hissing under the tires. Bailey sat alert, ears pricked forward, watching as if she already knew what waited at the end. The fire belonged to a small camp, tucked just off the service road. One boy sat by it, a camera on a tripod pointed into the trees. He looked up, startled, when I said, "You're not supposed to be out here." His face was familiar. The black t-shirt, the cracked iPhone I'd seen weeks before. Jimmy. The boy who brought me the first photo. "You filming a school project?" I asked. He shook his head. "I posted the pictures. People online said I faked it. They dared me to come back. I wanted to prove them wrong." I sighed, tired in a way that made my bones feel hollow. "So you lit a fire in a closed park and camped near the mines?" He looked down. "I didn't think it mattered. The park's empty." "It matters," I said, and heard my father's voice in my own. "You could have gotten hurt. Or worse." Bailey walked to him and sat hard, tail thumping once. He scratched behind her ears like they'd known each other years. She leaned into him, as if forgiving him already. I made him douse the fire, stomp dirt over the coals. We packed his tent in silence, the boy glancing back at the mine road again and again. By the time he climbed into the back seat, Bailey beside him, the last of the light had drained from the sky. The service road bent and narrowed. My headlights carved shallow tunnels through the trees. Gravel pinged against the undercarriage. I drove slower than usual, every nerve in my body strung tight. Jimmy sat silent in the back, Bailey pressed to his side. I kept my hands locked on the wheel. And then we passed the old mine entrance. It was there. Tall. Motionless. Wrong. Its frame towered above the brush, limbs too long, too thin, dangling like they'd forgotten how to swing. Its head, if you can call it that, was a rusted siren, angled slightly forward, as if listening to something buried deep in the ground. The metal was pitted, scarred, like it had stood in storms for decades. But it wasn't rust that chilled me. It was the stillness. The absolute, impossible stillness. It didn't step toward us. Didn't raise its arms. Didn't make a sound. It only watched. Jimmy gasped in the back seat. Bailey pressed harder into him, ears flattened, her body trembling with the effort of staying silent. I didn't stop. I didn't slow. I didn't dare. Because there's no protocol for when the thing you've dismissed as a campfire story finally takes shape in your headlights. There's no training manual for when the forest you've trusted your whole life shows you something that doesn't belong above ground. So I kept driving. I didn't look back. Because I knew if I did, I might not be able to keep going forward. The rest of the drive passed in silence. Gravel rattled beneath the tires, trees pressed close, the night thick as oil. Bailey shifted once in her seat, but didn't bark. Jimmy stared out the window, pale as chalk, clutching her fur like a lifeline. When the gate came into view, I felt the knot in my chest loosen by degrees. We passed through without stopping. No ceremony, no words. Just out. Behind us, the fire, the station, the mines, all of it, fell away into darkness. I never went back. Even now, when I close my eyes, I still see it. Not a blur, not a trick of light, but a shape too real, too wrong. The memory doesn't fade. It waits, patient as stone. That night, I chose to keep driving. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was survival. Either way, it's the only reason I'm alive to write this now. I mailed my badge in a plain envelope. No ceremony, no folded flag, no speech. Just a note that said, effective immediately. Samson. The truck sat in the driveway for weeks, a reminder I couldn't decide whether to keep or burn. Bailey sniffed the tires every morning like she expected me to grab the keys. Sometimes she'd sit at the door with her leash in her mouth, tail thumping, ready for another patrol. I couldn't tell her there were no patrols anymore. I tried. I said, "We're done, girl. No more rounds." But she cocked her head like I'd told her the moon was square. Dogs don't understand the absence of ritual. They only know it's morning and the woods are waiting. The truth was, the woods were always waiting. I sold the truck eventually. Used the cash to pay bills, stock the pantry, buy a new kettle. Normal things. But none of it made me feel normal. I'd catch myself listening at night, straining for sounds I prayed wouldn't come. Sometimes I thought I heard them anyway. When people in town asked why I quit, I said, budget cuts. It was easier than explaining the way silence can feel like a living thing. Easier than telling them the woods had shown me something I couldn't unsee. After I left, I spent hours at the library, hunched over maps until my eyes blurred. County plats, old mining surveys, accident reports. Then online, cryptid forums I used to mock, missing persons databases that stretched back decades, hunters' anecdotes about voices in the treeline. Patterns emerged. Always the same, an abandoned site, an industrial relic, a siren or horn rusting in a field, reports of tall figures where they didn't belong. Disappearances that sounded mundane until you stacked them side by side and saw the echoes. I marked them on my own map at home, pins spreading like an infection. The circle wasn't just around Northern Ridge. It was everywhere. Bailey would lay on the rug while I worked, head on her paws, ears twitching when I muttered dates and names under my breath. Sometimes she'd growl low, eyes fixed on the corner of the room, as if she saw something my map never would. I didn't tell her she was wrong. The word monster didn't feel right. Neither did cryptid. Too small. Too playful. What I'd seen wasn't folklore. It wasn't a campfire story made flesh. It was a fact. I started using the word anomaly. Not because it made sense, but because it didn't. It was the only word big enough for what didn't belong. I read about frequencies, about abandoned warning systems that sometimes broadcast phantom sounds decades after being shut off. About people drawn to noises that weren't there, stepping off curbs, wandering into traffic, walking into rivers. Every story felt like another piece of the same machine. Like the horns weren't just shapes, they were conduits. Listening posts. Or lures. Some nights I'd wake from dreams of metal echoing through trees, a low hum rattling my bones. I'd sit up sweating, Bailey pressed against me, and think about how sound doesn't need permission to travel. The idea that it might not just be Northern Ridge chilled me more than the memory of what I'd seen. The call came from an old colleague up north. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Just asked if I'd ever heard of Sam Carver. I said no. Then you should, he told me. He's been tracking this kind of thing longer than anyone. Disappearances. Sightings. Frequencies. He's got files going back decades. Government? I asked. He snorted. Not officially. He's his own thing. Scientist, soldier, hunter, I don't know. But he's got maps, Samson. And yours isn't the first park to close quiet. He gave me a time. A place. A meeting. After we hung up, I sat at the table with Bailey's head on my knee. I scratched behind her ears, staring at my map with its constellation of pins. The strings I'd drawn felt suddenly small compared to what my colleague described. Carver. A name. A direction. Maybe not answers, but better questions. And I was tired of asking them alone. The bag sits by the door now. Boots tucked beside it. Flashlight packed, spare batteries rattling like teeth. Notebook. Coffee tin. Bailey's harness folded on top. She knows. Of course she knows. Every time I reach for the bag, her tail starts up, slow at first, then quicker, like she's winding herself back to the rhythm she was born for. Patrol rhythm. She doesn't know we're not going back to Ridge. She doesn't know we're chasing ghosts on roads we've never walked. Maybe she doesn't care. Maybe she just wants to be beside me, the same way she was on the dock, on the ridge, in the truck when the thing stood at the tree line. I clip the harness anyway. She leans into me, ears forward, waiting. They say you can take the boy out of the woods, but you can't take the woods out of the boy. I used to laugh at that. Now I understand it wasn't a joke. The woods don't leave you. They grow in your marrow. They wait in your dreams. I left the park that night. I never went back. But it never left me. Sirenhead. That's what the internet calls it. It sounds silly out loud, like a comic book villain. But I saw it. Rusted metal where a face should be. A body that stood too still. You don't forget something that isn't supposed to exist. You don't forget what it means when the land you've sworn to protect shows you it belongs to something older, something hungrier. I don't know what Carver will tell me. I don't know if I'll come back with answers, or if I'll vanish like all the pins on my map. What I know is this: there are things in the woods that listen. Things that wait. Things that use our voices like bait. And if you've ever felt eyes on you when no one was there, if you've ever heard your name whispered when you were alone, then you already know.